We'd like about $50,000 from you. However, there was a competing project, and this was called the Pennsylvania and Sodus Bay Railroad. This was to be a low-grade route that was going to leave the Ithaca and Athens at North Spencer Summit, which is about 1,080 feet. So if you go down to Spencer on Route 34, when you pass all that moraine topography and you come out by the North Spencer Baptist Church or Christian Church, that area, that's about the summit, and that's a little bit below our level, but only about 100 feet or so. And then the grade would come gradually uphill just a little bit. By the time it got to Van Buskirk Gulf or Piper Road, it would be at this level, and then be almost exactly on the level as it snaked its way all the way through Newfield, ended up going behind Enfield, through Halseyville and into Trumansburg, and then on up to Sodus Bay on Lake Ontario. It would have been right above the village here. As far as I can gather, the depot would have been on Schaffer Road right before the T with Benjamin Hill Road. Right before Benjamin Hill starts up, that's where it would have crossed. Although I have no record of anything ever being built there as a station. So it was common practice in New York to finance. Now, where would the money to pay your bond come back? Well, that's obvious. You have the railroad that's running. It's going to be paying taxes to your town because you'll have a property tax on it. So you'll get money back that way. And you'll also make, the railroad will make money, and it will be able to pay your bonds back because they'll just be making money from their regular profits. So that was the idea. So the Pennsylvania Sodus Bay, so the request for $50,000, I did this in 2018 dollars. This would be asking, I'm asking now the Newfield Historical Society, would you like to bond yourself for $730,000? $730,000? At the 1860 population was 2,984, according to the census. That would have been $16.75 a person, but that's $235 per person. So if you want to be on the hook for $235, everybody, well, if you think you're going to have a railroad come to your town that's going to bring prosperity to your town, you're a farmer, all of a sudden you have much lower transportation costs, more markets, easier to get your goods in, so it sounded like a pretty good deal, and that was what was required of Newfield. So this was the route, now the Pennsylvania and Sodus Bay had backers. The main purpose was not to serve Newfield, Enfield, Ulysses, Covert. The main thing was to get coal from Pennsylvania to Lake Ontario at a much better route. There was a problem already here, although this was a far superior route to the route through Ithaca. Because to go to Ithaca, you have to go down to about 400 feet. Lake level is 380. And then you had to climb West Hill at least to the level of Ovid, about maybe 800 feet, and cross over. So why do that when you don't have to? But there was already a competition from other lines that did something similar. I mentioned already from the 1850s, we had a line from Binghamton all to Oswego. And Oswego was a very important port. At the same time that this railroad was being promoted, there was a railroad being promoted from Sodus Point to Stanley, which was connecting with the Elmira and Canandaigua. Already there was a line from Canandaigua to Jefferson, Watkins Glen, which in those days was known as Jefferson, as you know. I think we should change the name back to Jefferson, actually, to honor our president. Watkins Glen was just a guy who bought the Glen and made it an amusement area, so I think we should call it Jefferson again, but anyway, what do I know? This is not the Schuyler County Historical Society, so. Anyway, so, and then back to Horseheads and so forth. So that line from Stanley to Sodus Bay was completed in 1873. And so that would have, and ended up being a very important route for the Pennsylvania Railroad right up until the 1960s. Very important for their coal traffic, because all the coal would then go over to, especially over to Canada or out the St. Lawrence Seaway, or out the Seaway. So Newfield, Enfield, Trumansburg, they were approached for this reason, and they decided, they were both chartered in 1870. So in 1870, you have the Ithaca and Athens is chartered by the state, Pennsylvania and Sodus Bay is chartered by the state. The Ezra Cornell interests favored the Ithaca and Athens, but Newfield bonded itself for $52,000, which you can see back on one of those bonds there. Enfield and Ulysses also supported it, and they bonded for, the total was $152,000 from these three towns. So you can imagine the financial gain. Now I have a little map here you can see later. Well, what happened? The problem was, this I told was railroad fever. So yes, there was money, yes, there was industry, there wasn't enough industry to keep up, there wasn't enough money to keep up, and in 1872, so they started work in they were bonded in 1870 and working in 1871 and 72. And at a certain point, they couldn't pay the workers. And I know that because we were mentioning, if you go, it's on somebody's, I haven't gone back down and knock on the door to see who lives there, ask if I can go there anymore. But when you're on Route 3496 going down to Spencer, and Hillview Road comes up from where the dump used to be, there's a house right there, and if you walk behind it, there's a cut where the workers threw down their tools. Because they had to make a little bit, they're coming along the hillside. You know where the water tank is in West Danby? If you see the water, it's right behind there, and there's some hunting, some sort of people put little hunting cabins along the grade there as it coming close to Maple Avenue. Well, as it went farther south and was about to connect at North Spencer, they had to cut through a small hillside, not very much, and not rock, and they just threw down their tools and stopped. Then came 1873, and 1873 was a really big problem because there was a financial panic in the United States. We've gone through several, if you think 2008 was a problem for your stocks or employment or whatever, that was nothing compared to what they used to have routine panics in the United States before the banking system got much more, you may complain now, but the banking system was much more stable than it was. And in 1873, there was what they called the Panic of 1873, and they just then couldn't raise any more money. They were capitalized for $1 million, but never, I have the numbers here, I'll show you in a little bit. They never raised more than about half of that. At a certain point, they were allowed to raise the capitalization, but they never raised more money, so they couldn't do it. Now, I heard from my colleague here, that's something I don't know, I'll have to ask him his information, that they couldn't get delivery of the rails and the bridge work because the British foundries were oversubscribed. That's possible also. I'm sure it's true. If you say it, it must be true. But that is true. It gives you an idea. The industry was going full blast, but everywhere wanted a railroad. And remember, the western expansion is going on the same. So you're building railroads all through Illinois and Missouri and all these places too. Merritt King, who I see his name on the bond here, and I just found out from Al, you're saying he was a Danby, he lived in Danby. He has signed all those bonds, and he was one of the main officers of the Pennsylvania Sodus Bay. Maybe he was a local attorney, I'm guessing. A Tompkins County attorney, so maybe that's why he was on it. He then bought the whole thing at auction for almost nothing in 1876. He bought the remnants, but he only thought maybe he would possibly be able to complete the section from Ovid to Seneca Falls, because that area through Romulus and so forth doesn't, at that time, well, they were building the Geneva and Ithaca across it, but he thought that's a very easy area to complete, but he never could complete it. So the bonds, so Newfield was on the hook for $52,000 worth of bonds. And I just learned something by looking at these bonds. I see, and oh, by the way, these were 7% bonds. Would you like to buy a 7% bond now? Yeah, I would like to buy a 7% bond. So this was simple interest. So both in May and September, you could clip your coupon, you see it there, send it to the Union Bank in New York, and you would get $3.50 on your $100. Well, that's not so bad. And then you would get your full $100 after, I think, 30 years. Right. So what happened is they couldn't pay this back. They refinanced this with an Ithaca bank, and at 3.5%. So what they must have done with the renewal, and this this is the first time I saw this, they must have said to the Ithaca bank, will you refinance this? The town still commits itself to paying this off, but refinanced it at this lower rate, and the bondholders must have accepted that. And it was being paid well off into the 20th century. And I was hoping that some of you may come from families where you remember paying this off, but anyway. I looked at some annual reports of the state of New York on the railroads and some interesting things here. And the only officer from Newfield was someone named C.C. Cook in 1871. So one of the officers of the railroad, or I don't mean the employees, but the board, was named C.C. Cook. And by 2 years later, he or she was gone from the list. So what happens? The reason is every railroad had to report to the state controller of railroads and their financial situation and their passengers and so forth, and all their accidents. It's interesting to read because there's some pretty gruesome accidents that happened back in those days. But they had to report them all. But of course the Sodus Bay didn't have any. So where can you see the Pennsylvania and Sodus Bay now? And I have a few maps here. I'll describe it in words. And we can also look at the map, the regular map. Okay, I mentioned the grade from Hillview, North Spencer, and it hugs the hill, the whole side of Dawes Hill, crosses Maple Avenue, and that big gulf past Maple Avenue in West Amby would have had a trestle. Curves around, and when you get to Van Buskirk Gulf Road, if you're going up, and just when you're entering the woods, so there's big field on your right as you go up. If you look to the left behind the White House, the grade comes along there, crossed at an angle, goes off in the woods, and you can still see it there. I have a nice photo of it. Now it's only about maybe this high. You know, it's been eroded. It was never used, and how many years ago? But you can see it there. When you come up Piper Road, many of you have seen the stone facing that was used in the advertisement here. There were two. Originally, Piper Road was only about this wide. And I don't remember seeing the other facing, so I think it was been taken out well before my time, whenever they widened that road, probably in the 1920s, I'm guessing, when they improved town roads. So you can imagine that it would have been a much narrower little bridge over there so that wagons could get through, but for automobiles. And on Piper Road, you can see on both sides, you can follow the grade back. If you follow it back south, you get to where it would have crossed Van Buskirk Gulf itself, a fairly high bridge. Now, right here, where we are here, it then followed, it came out, you know, Little Tree Orchards. The main road in Little Tree Orchards is the grade. The main one going back into their orchards. It came at that angle, so